Hello and welcome to Mental Health News Radio Network, your source for information about mental health providers and the work they do in the world, the organizations who support their work, volunteers, and mental health consumers. This network is brought to you by ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment providers. Compliancy-group.com, making sure your behavioral health group is following regulatory guidelines. As you know, audits are never fun, but passing them by working with Compliancy Group will allow you to focus on treatment. And Everything EHR, devoted to helping agencies find the best electronic health records available in behavioral health. Thank you for tuning in to MentalHealthNewsRadioNetwork.com.
Hi, everyone. This is Kristen Sunanta-Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio. I'm here with Dawson Church, who is an award-winning author, and his best-selling book, The Genie in Your Genes, has been hailed by reviewers as a breakthrough in our understanding of the link between emotions and genetics. Dawson, thank you so much for agreeing to come on our show.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Kristen. Thank you.
Now, please tell our listeners why you wanted to write a book about emotions and genetics.
I was going to a lot of professional conferences, and I was hearing exciting things coming from the field of epigenetics. And epigenetics is the science of how influences from outside the cell, outside the DNA, can shift gene expression. So our genes are being constantly engaged by influences from outside the cell, even outside the body. And so there was that one whole field of research happening. And then energy psychology was making more and more impact in the field of psychology. So more therapists, more life coaches were getting trained in energy psychology methods, especially EFT or emotional freedom techniques. And so there were the geneticists, there were the energy psychologists, and then there were the people in energy healing generally, and those at the leading edge of conventional medicine. And I found that even though they were all really doing fascinating things, there wasn't a lot of dialogue between them. The connections hadn't been made. So I wanted to write a book that would really piece together all of the parts of the puzzle so that people could see how energy psychology, emotions, all of these intangibles, our shifts in our mood, our spiritual state, our inner state, our consciousness, is literally affecting our gene expression moment by moment. And so that was the initial scope of the book in the early 2000s. And at that time, we could infer that was happening. Now, of course, there's tons of experimental evidence to show that it's happening all the time.
It is happening all the time, and I think people hear the word genetics and you know, people like me go, oh, science, I failed that class, I'm not even going to pay attention. But the older I've gotten, the more I realize, and, you know, after doing 450 or so interviews with global experts on anything to do with behavioral health, this really piques my interest because it's absolutely true. Our emotions do affect you know, our entire state of being. So for you,
they affect your whole life.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Think, for example, about a veteran who has a pretty good life, and then he's in Iraq, he's in Afghanistan, perhaps he was in Vietnam 45 years ago, and there's one horrendous incident. In one of my books, I tell the story of one veteran whose best friend was killed in Vietnam. And so that one event was the kind of the pivotal trauma of his life. And that event only took a few seconds, and yet that is followed then, the sequel is 45 years plus of PTSD.
Yes.
And so these emotional impacts of these events can be long-lasting and change gene expressions throughout our lifetime. Or the abused child, especially what's called developmental trauma, when people are traumatized at the age of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. That developmental trauma literally affects their gene expression, affects their hormone levels, affects their neurobiological development, their entire lives. So not only are these kinds of events pervasive in their effects on our physiology, they also can be pervasive in their effects on our entire subsequent history of our lives. So yeah, big impact.
Yeah, and not only that, but they also affect our children, our friends, our family. I mean, we carry out that trauma with us, and that becomes part of a family history.
Yeah, and the new studies of intergenerational trauma are very interesting. And this was at first just frankly unbelievable to me and even most experts in epigenetics that epigenetically changes can be passed between generations. Now, it's one thing to do the science and discover that emotions and experiences are changing gene expression sometimes permanently, but it was it seemed really far-fetched that it could affect that epigenetic changes could be passed along and inherited to the next generation. But now in mouse studies, animal studies, we found that those studies can be passed along for at least 7 generations.
Yes.
And we found in depression studies that depression, for example, can be passed from mother to daughter to granddaughter, three generations in humans. Even research done 2 years ago showed that Holocaust, the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were showing some of the same epigenetic tags as Holocaust survivors themselves. So it's amazing how we learn these family scripts of trauma, and then they aren't just mental, they aren't just emotional, they are literally genetic, and they are shifting our genome even several generations out.
Absolutely. So all of that seems so heavy, and like, someone listening to it would think, well, I'm forever damaged and I will never, be free of this, and I'm only going to pass it along to anyone else I'm near or any family I may have. So what are some good things or some pluses around, how people can arrest this development or be free of it?
It goes both ways, but the budget for researching happiness, unfortunately, is a lot less than the budget for researching the bad stuff, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and so on. In fact, if you look back at the history of psychological research, say, since 1950, the two most popular questionnaires are the Beck Anxiety Inventory and the Beck Depression Inventory. Now, of course, they've gone through several iterations, and there are thousands of different assessments, but those are the two big ones, the Beck Anxiety Inventory and the Beck Depression Inventory. And so what those do, they both are scored on a 20-plus point scale. And if you get a score of 0, that means you have no anxiety and no depression. So for literally, we've got more than a half century of research, and the goal was to bring the client to 0, where they had 0 anxiety symptoms and 0 depression symptoms. Same thing for PTSD, same thing for phobias. So the whole way that research we've been doing for literally 60, 70 years reflects a worldview. And that worldview is that you want to bring the client to 0, where they have no anxiety, no depression, no psychological symptoms. And only very, very recently, like starting in the late 80s, have we been asking, well, is there such a thing as being like not just not depressed or not anxious, but being happy? We weren't even asking a search question. So one of the most pervasive in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and Margaret Mead talks about this as well. Margaret Mead said the ultimate taboo is to not have a word for something, not to have language to even describe something. And really, in psychological research, we weren't even looking for things like spirituality. Then a colleague of mine, Gail Ironson, did a landmark study published in just after 2000. And it was a study of people with HIV, and they tracked over the course of several years. They tracked their viral load, how much HIV they had in their body, and also their T cells, which are the cells that are killed by HIV, and also that are central to the functioning of your immune system. And they looked at all the factors that affected the number of HIV viruses there were in their bloodstreams, and they looked at the number of T cells. And what happens with HIV, if a person is going to die, is they have fewer and fewer and fewer T cells. So the slope is downward for that. And then the slope is upward for the number of HIV viruses they have. And so she did this study of what was happening in these two important biomarkers in people with HIV. But she asked one crucial question, which hadn't been asked before, which was the quality of spiritual experience and the nature of their beliefs about the universe and reality. And when she ran this was a comprehensive study in which there were many, many variables the researchers looked at. And when they ran all the results, they found that the strongest predictor of mortality, the strongest predictor of both whether that viral count rose or whether the T cell count dropped, was the person's beliefs about the universe. That was it was more important than risky sexual behavior, it was more important than age, than smoking, than socioeconomic class. It was way more important than anything. It was just what people believed and what they believed, if they believed that the universe was a punishing place, that the universe was hostile, that was the strongest predictor of them having worse and worse results until they died. If they believed the universe was a benevolent place, that was the strongest predictor of them having better and better results until some of them, by the end of the study, there was no trace of HIV in their bodies.
Wow.
So it's amazing how our beliefs, our belief about the universe is hugely influential on our health. So we now are asking these questions. Now in all my research, I include a measure of happiness. I want to know, how happy are you? And is what we're doing with you now making you happier? So it's not just, are we not depressed? Are we a zero for anxiety and depression? But do you wake up every day full of joy, full of bliss? Do you have an optimistic style for explaining what goes on in your life, or a pessimistic one? That alone can predict mortality, and the changes in the two groups are enormous. The difference in lifespan between optimists and pessimists is, again, it varies by study, but it's around 8 years. I mean, huge number, and all of that's physiology. It's driving cortisol, it's driving immunoglobulins, it's driving your immune system, it's driving your inflammation markers. All of these physiological signs are being driven by your mental state and your mood. So, yeah, this is remarkable how pervasive these effects are in our bodies.
Absolutely. And I've learned just through my own personal experience, I was born, and my listeners know this, I was born into trauma. Literally, my mother was in horrifying trauma outside of just the trauma of giving birth. And I was born right on into that and then spent a life or childhood in trauma. And I can tell you that in my early 40s, and I'm 47 now, I had some horribly traumatic experiences with some people that have character disorders. Nothing like a narcissist to sort of bring out the best or the worst in you. And I can say that after those experiences in my 40s, I got so low in terms of depression and so on that it sort of cracked me open. It did crack me open into this place of, I am grateful for every moment that I'm here after spending years of thinking, when can I get out of here? I'm sick of this. I don't want to be here anymore. And now I eat life. So the point of saying that is, you can have a whole lifetime of this trauma within you, and it's in your DNA, and it's a familial relationship to trauma and all of those things. And you can also make a huge shift at some point in your life and then become the happiest you've ever been in your entire life. But it takes a heck of a lot of work to get there. And sometimes it takes some major pain to get there too.
Yes, and you can reverse that. That's the good news, that epigenetically. As I mentioned, there isn't much money to study happiness, but the few studies that we have done, well, that other researchers have done, that look at can these genetic tags be reversed, show they can be. The biggest study I've ever done in terms of importance in my mind was one where we looked at it was a randomized controlled trial of veterans with PTSD. And these are people with severe levels of clinical PTSD. They have flashbacks, they have nightmares, they're hypervigilant, and so on. And this was the follow-up to a lot of previous work I'd done, especially with the stress hormone cortisol, looking at their cortisol levels. We knew from previous research that cortisol levels can be shifted. And so the belief in psychiatry in the early 2000s was that PTSD, and again, the American Psychiatric Association commissioned a huge study, and it was published in 2005, and it said that PTSD is a treatment-resistant condition, and the best you can do is manage it with drugs. That was the best that they could figure out, PTSD. But now we have a lot of research showing that PTSD is fairly easily curable in most cases. And so after doing several other randomized controlled trials and outcome studies of PTSD, all of which showed that most people got better, I then did this study of the epigenetics of PTSD. And so with some distinguished colleagues, we looked at groups of veterans, randomized controlled trial, getting either the usual care in hospital or getting usual care plus 10 sessions of EFT, which combines acupressure tapping with cognitive approaches. And we found that after 10 sessions, their gene expression profiles had changed substantially. Wow. That inflammation genes were downregulated, that immune genes were upregulated, and another colleague of mine then began to look at this in terms of single session therapy with normal patients. So she took a group of normal patients, they got a placebo intervention one weekend, the next weekend they got EFT. She looked at their whole genome before and after, and she found differential expression in 72 genes. And the genes that she found differential expression in were key regulatory genes like the genes responsible for your metabolism, upregulating your metabolism, genes responsible for the called tumor necrosis factors. And what they do is help your body spot cells that are malfunctioning, cancer cells, and help the body identify those cells and kill them. Genes that code for aging, genes that code for the repair of the cell membrane, genes that code for increased production of white and red blood cells. So she found, again, generally speaking, immunity dialed way up, inflammation dialed way down in 72 genes after just 1 hour of EFT. So this is jumping far ahead because there are many other studies as well, but it shows that PTSD, these symptoms are easily reversible, again, in these veterans, 10 sessions of EFT, in other studies, just 4 or 5 sessions of EFT. And then an EFT practitioner, colleague of mine, who's a psychiatrist, who's been working for the Army for the last 10 years, says, oh, yeah, I talked to him a few weeks ago. He said, all those old studies of yours, 4 or 6 sessions of EFT, tapping and acupressure. And he says, it doesn't take that long, Dawson. Most of the soldiers I see with PTSD, it's just 1 or 2 sessions. So, these really good clinicians have honed their approach, and now in even less than the 10 sessions that we used in the gene study, they're able to work with both veterans and warriors, and they're dramatically better. I've just been editing a book by a colleague of mine who was a psychologist at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, and she treated over 500 soldiers there who had PTSD. And it's just amazing to hear her stories. People walk in and some of them had their weapons taken away from them because they were suicidal or threatening harm to others. And she just gave them 1 session because in these forward operating bases, they're deploying all the time. You have no idea when you'll see the soldier again. So she'd give them 1 session, sometimes more than 1, and they'd have huge shifts. So it's possible. The good news is it's possible to take that person who's been highly traumatized and shift them quickly. And as you shift them psychologically, their gene expression is changing right along with it.
That is so fascinating, and I love this. I know in the past, things like EFT were not taken seriously by the standard medical profession, and that's so greatly shifted. But I want to hear from you that's in the thick of it. How is it today in that landscape of the general medical profession, and then, what are looked at as alternative medical solutions?
Well, there was a biography of Michelangelo called The Agony and the Ecstasy. And so there's stories of agony to report, Kristen, and stories of ecstasy. Just an agony one first. I'm just helping some colleagues with some correspondence right now with one of the key decision makers in the American Psychological Association, and he's calling it pseudoscience, and advocating that it not become part of APA treatment guidelines. So that's the agony. People who, Max Planck famously observed that science advances one funeral at a time, and you just have to wait for the old guard to die out sometimes. And it's really frustrating because I've gone from being a polite advocate of these methods to be a fairly strident advocate of these methods, because it's like, for me, I'm a really nice guy, but like, if you leave a veteran suffering for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, if we do make the same mistake with the current crop of veterans we made with the Vietnam veterans and leave them suffering for 30, 40 years, seeing high rates of suicides, which, high rates of unemployment, of medical care utilization, high rates of domestic violence, huge number. By 1986, something like half of all the prisoners in federal penitentiaries were Vietnam veterans. I mean, this is just not okay. So I've gone from being a fairly neutral voice to being more like saying, hey folks, this is not okay. We can't be doing this with our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. We have to get these effective treatments to them. But again, it's a mixed bag. Right. Some VA hospitals use EFT and other methods. There's one called ART that's really effective. EMDR is really effective. But the APA, the American Psychological Association, just downgraded EMDR, which is one of the most effective treatments for PTSD there is. So it's the agony and the ecstasy. And change in science, you think that scientists are really eager to embrace the new and make new discoveries. And what research shows is they're not generally like that. There's the Institute of Medicine, which is an arm of the National Institutes of Health, did a study of all the research evidence in 2000, and they found that on average it takes 17 years for the medical profession to adopt a new technique, and that it only adopts 20% of those that are more effective than the old ones. The other 80% just wither on the vine. So what I say to people in my talks, when I give talks to medical conferences, I say, if I was giving you a cell phone, and I said, Kristen, here's a cell phone for you. I'm going to give you the cell phone. It's yours. Free, just no payment plan. I'm just giving you the cell phone. And it's 17 years old, and it's 80% disabled. 80% of the functions on the cell phone are disabled. Only 20% of them are functioning. And, would you be very excited about that cell phone?
No.
But that's what we do. That is what we accept in our medical care. When we walk into hospital, we're getting 20% of 17-year-old care, and somehow when it comes to our bodies and our health, we think this is acceptable. It's loony that we want the new technology for our smartphones and our smart cars and our smart aircraft and the drones delivering our packages to our door, and yet when it comes to medicine, as a society, we're perfectly content to accept 20% of 17-year-old technology, and that's where we are. It's just but when it comes to veterans, it's scandalous that this is being allowed to continue, and it must stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me about the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare, which is something that you founded. Is that still going on today, and that is where you're, doing these trials and such?
Yes, we do the research through there, and we also have a big program called the Veteran Stress Project. And when I began to first get interested in this, and we began to present EFT and other energy healing methods to the VA around 2004, 2005, we were bringing them evidence, initially clinical evidence from therapists of these techniques. They were so incredibly interested. I mean, here they were facing this massive wave of soldiers coming back from Iraq with PTSD, and so we told them that we had this treatment that was able to cure them in essentially, 3 to 5 sessions. They were just so incredibly interested and curious and wanted to do research on it and listen to us. Not.
Right.
They had absolutely zero interest We had members of Congress writing letters to the head of the VA, a guy called Eric Shinseki, but he was booted out later on. We resigned, but the members of Congress were writing these letters saying, Dr. Shinseki, you've got to look at this stuff. It's
right.
It really works for our constituents, and the VA just completely blew them off. Did not want to even look at these new therapies. And so we then started our own project called the Veteran Stress Project, and began very, very small in 2007, 2008. But now, as of 2017, we have treated over 18,000 veterans and their family members with PTSD, free of charge, with energy therapies. We've done, there have now been 8 randomized controlled trials and several other outcome studies, and those show that about 90% of veterans recover from PTSD permanently after 6 or more sessions of EFT. So, yeah, it's happened despite the VA. Now I think the VA might be changing. I have more and more VA therapists showing up in my trainings, paying, but again, there's no official program to make it happen. It's just they're paying out of their own pockets to get their training from us in clinical EFT. So it's shifting, but again, the pace of change is slow.
Did you need to use EFT on yourself to deal with
all of this?
Yeah, it's so rough when you have proof and you have the studies and someone just completely think
it's a long
hurting. It's long. Allowing this healing to happen.
Yeah, I use EFT myself actually every day, and I use meditation every day. I with some colleagues, I developed an evidence-based form of meditation called Eco Meditation, and we make it available free on the web, and I do that every morning, and I also tap whenever I feel frustrated or emotionally off balance, and it's powerful to do this. And what we're beginning to see now as we build up this profile of which genes are changing is we certainly know that it affects the physical body in remarkable ways. It lowers resting heart rate, lowers blood pressure. We have several studies showing that it lowers cortisol, your main stress hormone. It's turning off the genes that code for cortisol. And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely, I use these things every day. There's also a way to use them to boost performance. So you want to write a book, which I'm doing right now, new book. You want to think clearly. You want to give a good keynote presentation. You want to help people in your practice. All of these things are ways in which you can help all of these parts of your performance by meditating for sure and by tapping. So I use those all the time.
What's the website that people would go to that you were just mentioning?
All of these can be found for free at my website, DawsonGift.com. So at DawsonGift.com, there is the EFT mini manual. I have some reports. I also have links to various programs using either meditation or EFT for weight loss, for relationships, fibromyalgia, for other kinds of problems. And so the meditation instructions are at Dawson Gift, and also the EFT manual is at Dawson Gift for free. Wonderful. So people just get it, use it, and then start to apply it in their own lives.
You also are the editor of Energy Psychology Theory, Research, and Treatment, which is a peer-reviewed professional journal. I want to give our listeners the website. It's www.energypsychologyjournal.org. When did you start that journal?
2009.
Okay.
And it's helped catalyze research in the field by encouraging people to do replication studies, to do outcome studies, to submit clinical reports. Like there's all kinds of interesting things being done. In one VA hospital, for example, the nurses there use EFT, and they have a weaning schedule. So they wean their patients off drugs. And so it's really amazing to see what these clinicians have figured out. What are the markers for when you reduce the client's level of a certain medication? So we encourage clinical reports like that help the clinical community know what's useful in these treatments.
Interesting. So that's a peer-reviewed journal, but plenty of, non-peers can go there and find out all of that information as well. I looked at it myself and thought, my God, the mass amount of information that you have there is impressive.
Yes. Yeah, and all the editorials there are free. So I write about things like the importance of touch to the brain, and how touch plays a vital role in any kind of therapeutic breakthrough. I tell stories about veterans sometimes, or other people who've been traumatized who recover in the editorials there. And so I write really provocative things about gene expression, about recovery from various illnesses. And the big picture here is that we now know that people can recover fairly quickly from most kinds of mental illness. I think there are some kinds of mental illness that are much harder to work with. I've heard very few reports of schizophrenia, for example, being cured by energy therapies. And so there's some that where the person, for example, has been passing signals through their brain to do with a certain kind of trauma for 30, 40 years. And those are very hardy, conditioned neural pathways, and I think those can be hard to change. But the research shows that most anxiety, most depression, most PTSD, most phobias are phobias, for example, with energy therapies just disappear usually in one session. It's very, very rare for a phobia with fear of flying or fear of driving or whatever it might, fear of water.
Fear of bugs.
Most of those phobias, bugs, those just disappear in one session. So
particular one of mine. Tell me about addiction treatment. How does that play a role in this kind of therapy?
Addiction treatment, I'd say, is one of the consensus is that it's one of the most difficult things to treat by any kind of therapy, including energy therapies. And so what we focus on with our work is, rather than addictions, which is a long-term pattern, we focus on the immediate cravings. And so, for example, in all of my live workshops, we have a whole module on dealing with cravings: chocolate cravings, cigarette cravings, alcohol cravings, sweet cravings, pasta cravings, white foods. And in several research studies, we've been measuring people's levels of craving. And what we find is when they are presented with that chocolate and they start to tap, their craving levels go down by an average of 83%. So it's really, really helpful, and they no longer crave those things. Sometimes just tapping on your craving for Kit Kats, whatever it might be, they go away forever. So it's really useful, and if people used to use it whenever they have the craving, they can break that long-term cycle of addiction to that thing. That's why in all of I think there are 5 trials of EFT for weight loss. All of them show not only that people lose weight when they use EFT, but then when they're tracked, 6 months, a year later, they've lost more weight. They keep on losing weight because they've been able to overcome their cravings for whatever it was they were eating or drinking before. So, it's really effective for cravings. But it's not a magic bullet. It's not like you tap once and then your craving disappears forever. It might take tapping several times. It might involve really using a practitioner, getting to the psychological roots of that. What kinds of emotions are you projecting onto food? And that can take a while.
Right, exactly. Tell me, why is this such a passion for you? Because, man, it is a passion for you. So what got you
You think?
just a smidge. So what got you started on this path?
I think that a crucial factor is that I hate to see people suffering unnecessarily. And some kinds of suffering, I think, are unavoidable or hard to avoid. You can try and not suffer in various ways, but, there are random accidents and people have various life circumstances, and many people have difficult childhoods. And, if you just can't avoid that kind of suffering, but most suffering is avoidable. We show now, just for example, I'll take an extreme example. There are several studies of Rwandan orphans, and these were people who were usually 2, 3, 5 years old in 1994 when the horrendous genocide occurred in Rwanda, and about 800,000 people were killed, almost a million people were killed in a very short time, and killed horribly by being hacked to death with machetes. And so many of them had children, many of the children survived, and so now you have this huge number of orphans, and that happened more than 20 years ago. So these people are now in their mid-20s, and they are horrendously traumatized. And so There have been several studies using energy psychology techniques with Rwandan orphans, and they show that the majority of them just lose all of their PTSD symptoms. And so they go out then and they are able to function. They go to university. They go back to school. They start little businesses of their own. They become able to function, and they can leave the orphanage. And the orphanage, these are called orphanages, but the people in them are in their 20s. So it's powerful to see. And so when you see that kind of suffering can be relieved, you get passionate about it. You don't want people to suffer unnecessarily. People suffer, Kristen, through worry.
Yes.
We have all this evolutionary machinery in our brains to help us escape from predators, and no predators anymore. And what happens is that machinery just spins out of control every day, making us worry about stuff that never happens. And so we have this evolutionary mismatch between brains geared to be acutely sensitive to the bad stuff, and not only that, our brains are acutely geared to not be sensitive to the good stuff. There's no evolutionary reason why you should appreciate a beautiful sunset or happy music. So our brains conspire against us to make us very attuned to negative cues. I was just reading today a study showing how there's part of the midbrain that is highly entrained to negative cues and just basically anything happy or good just passes by, makes no impression on the brain.
Yeah.
So you want people to relearn this and to shift their functioning and not suffer. And I'm just looking for all the leverage points I can find to get the message across. You're worrying, you're driving yourself crazy with negative thinking. Don't do it, and don't do it because it doesn't feel good, and certainly don't do it because of your health. That study that found that optimists live 8 years longer than pessimists. Are you willing to give up 10 years of your life
Absolutely.
in order to preserve that pattern of negative thinking? Don't do it. I try and really get the message across that it's having an impact on your lifespan, your well-being. And so that makes me passionate about sharing that message so that we reduce the suffering of as many people as possible.
Absolutely. I used to say this, and people would look at me like I had three heads, but now they get it. And my ex-husband is one of my best friends. Just one example of that worry. When we lived in South Florida, we were in the hurricane zone, and we certainly had several hurricanes that came through during that time, but we had minimal property damage. It was horrible. We did lose a lot of things that were awful, but I looked at that situation like, okay, yes, I've lost clothing. I've lost all my son's drawings from, the time he was in first grade. I'm very sad about that, but those are just things. I'm glad that we survived this and made it closer, as a family. And my ex-husband's way of dealing with it was a month before the hurricane even happened, he was giving moment-to-moment disastrous reports of the hurricane before we even got there. And I would say to him, I don't want to hear this. I want to enjoy this month. I don't want to hear every minute that there's some big weather thing, that's going to happen that could potentially kill us. I don't want the stress. I don't want what that's going to do to my body, my mental state, everything by continuing to hear this. But for him, it became a drug, that adrenaline hit, that dopamine hit of listening to every single report. And many times in our marriage, I thought we are living two completely different lives, because here I am, Miss Happy, going along as much as I can, fighting against this constant negativity and worry that was ingrained, that was ingrained in him. So consequently, we don't live in the same dwelling as we did in the past, and we're very good friends. And when he gets to that place, I know for me where he's going to go negative, I say, okay, I'm out. I'll see you tomorrow. Because
now, you call it an addiction, Kristen.
Yeah.
You use the word addiction as an addiction to your own high levels of cortisol.
Absolutely.
And so people, and again, that addiction is what kept your ancestors safe 150,000 years ago, and it's what's killing you now.
Yes.
If you have high cortisol over time, it leads to, in the Genie in your genes, I have a list of the things it leads to, and it's just a long and ugly list of bad things in your body. So it is so worth shifting your
Yes.
function. And it takes a while to addict yourself to the good stuff, but if you meditate every day, if you tap regularly, then after a while you start to become habituated to those positive internal biochemicals. You have those endorphins in your brain. Your ratio of serotonin and dopamine changes. Your levels of cortisol go way down. I did one study last year at Esalen, because I teach every year at all the major teaching institutions like Esalen and Kripalu and New York Open Center and Omega. And I did one study of one of those workshops at Esalen, and we found that in the week that people were at Esalen, their baseline cortisol dropped by 49%. I mean, that's a massive drop.
I bet.
In the lab I used to test cortisol, like when they get my results in, they're always like blown away. They just can't believe cortisol will drop that much, that fast, but it can. So we're addicting people to positive emotions, feel-good emotions, and then if they change their set points to where they can feel those positive feelings and experience the positive biochemistry, then after a while, they are intolerant, like you are now, of emotional environments that don't support that ability to feel good. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
Well worth doing.
That's so funny. You're right. It becomes intolerable. It's not that my empathy has changed. I would call myself a high capital empath. It isn't that. It's just that I just choose, I choose my environment, where I want to be, how I want to live, thoughts I'm going to think. I make a conscious effort to stay in that more positive time frame. And I think a lot of it too is personal responsibility. Of course, there's that period where if you are in trauma or you're suffering from PTSD, you literally need an intervention to help you get out of that. Your brain has worked and your body has worked itself into a groove that you physically cannot get yourself out of, and you need outside support for that. But once you've done that, it's your personal choice to stay on that path as opposed to go back to that negative space.
You're exactly right. That cortisol response, adrenaline response, was meant to be a short-term thing.
Yes.
It was meant to get you out of the path of a speeding car, make you run away from a predator, make you avoid danger. That's an appropriate use of that. And our cortisol spikes when that happens. But then after 3, 5, 7 minutes, like if you, for instance, have a near miss on the freeway and you pull over and you're really shaking and really emotionally shaken as well, then if you just sit there for 15, 20 minutes, you'll just return to normal as your cortisol stabilizes and drops again. It's only when you think about that thing over and over and over again that you drive your cortisol high, or you have an habitual cortisol response. So our cortisol is meant to rise in response to real threats and then drop again quickly. It's when you have imaginary threats that are occupying your mind, worries all the time that bother you, that's when you're inappropriately driving your stress biochemistry into that state. And that's what really, the toll on your body over time is just horrendous. You
just validated for me why it was so important for me to choose to go work with prey animals as a therapy modality for me. I chose horses because of past trauma and fear. And I chose horses because I wanted to work with animals that are, prey animals. And that was a choice on my part. And I think, after everything that you've just said, that was a really good choice I made.
It is a good choice. Yes.
Yeah. Dive in, people, listeners, dive into all of what we're talking about. Dawson, this has been awesome. I hope you'll come on again, because there is so much more to talk about with you that would be so beneficial to all of our listeners.
Oh, I'd love to. We can talk about the Veteran Stress Project and about PTSD. We can also talk about those neurochemicals and the way the brain functions, because we're now building up a really interesting profile of brain states and what brainwaves mean and how brainwaves change. We're hooking people up to EEGs for live therapy sessions so we can see what's happening in their brains during energy therapies. That's yielding all kinds of information about how this changes the pathways by which the brain processes information. So we've just scratched the surface here today.
Wonderful. Absolutely. We're talking not even to fill up a thimble of what we've captured here today. There's so much more to delve into. Tell our listeners, where are you speaking next? What venue are you going to be at doing a live talk?
I will be at the New York Open Center in late April 2017, I'll be at Omega Institute in August of 2017. If you haven't been to Omega, too, New York Open Center is in the heart of New York City in Manhattan. Omega is about 2 hours north near the Hudson River, beautiful rural campus. And in July, I'll be at Esalen Institute. And for those of you who heard news about the road slides and the bridge outage there at Esalen is reopening next month, and we will have our regular workshops there in July. And then I'll be at Kripalu, another major teaching center, in October. And I often teach with people like my friend Lissa Rankin, MD, who's the author of The Fear Cure. I teach with Joe Dispenza, who's the author of You Are the Placebo.
Wonderful. Yes, I've read his work.
Joe's amazing. I was teaching with him this last weekend, actually. We were doing an event called Junior Cells.
Yeah.
2 weeks before that, I was with Donna Eden and David Feinstein of energy medicine fame, doing a workshop on energy psychology. So, if you go to DawsonGift.com, you'll see a link to the schedule of all the live workshops.
Good.
And they're all over the world, so you can find one near you.
I want to make sure, too, I know I've mentioned the energypsychologyjournal.org, also NIIH.org and yourgeniusgene.com. There's also EFTuniverse.com, which is another place. And you write for Psychology Today, or is it Huffington Post, or both?
Huffington Post.
Huffington Post. Okay, terrific. So they can find you all over the place. I don't know how we got so lucky that you came on our show. Either we found you or someone on your team found us, but I'm really grateful that, that this came about.
Kristen, thanks for your passion and your interest in helping people heal. It's powerful.
Yes, it is. And yeah, absolutely. Like I had told you before we even started recording, my little show is not so little anymore, and it's gone far beyond what I ever thought, it would be. And that to me tells me that there are so many people in the 170 some countries we're downloaded in, many of which English is not their first language, and we're still downloaded there. That tells me that there are a heck of a lot of people out in the world that really want to heal and feel that joy and happiness in their life, and that's why they tune in. So you're now a part of that on our show. I appreciate that so much, as you already are in all of the endeavors that you're a part of. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, may your influence keep on expanding, and may many more people find those useful pieces of information for their own health and well-being on your show.
Oh, well, and same to you with your work, Dawson. Thank you so much for coming on our show.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. Please join us next time on Blog Talk Radio. Visit mentalhealthnewsradio.com for a list of upcoming and past shows. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, please visit everythingehr.com or email me at hello@everythingehr.com. And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.
At Buffalo Wild Wings, they'll admit they often go overboard with their limited-time offerings. They just can't help themselves. Take their new signature sampler. You get wings and 3 shareable options like fried pickles or cheese curds. Then there's their aptly named over-the-top nachos, a literal mountain of crispy tortilla chips loaded with your choice of pulled pork or honey barbecued grilled chicken, jalapenos, and more. Then top it all off with their new Platinum Margarita. Go overboard with them today at Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Available for a limited time while supplies last. Please drink responsibly.
If you want to experience moments of joy, excitement, and satisfaction, visit the Honda Summer Spectacular event, where well-qualified buyers can get 1.9% APR on the 2018 Honda CR-V LX, part of KBB.com's 2018 Best Overall Brand. You've just entered car buying bliss.
See dealer for financing details based on 2018 branded awards from Kelley Blue Book. Visit KBB.com for information.